One of the most integral qualities that a work of fiction has is its inherent ability to be interpreted. With the many constraints of the real world being lifted, you can engage yourself in a story that may be completely outlandish and unrealistic, yet based on your own experiences in life, you're still able to apply your own feelings and rationale into the story, and maybe those thoughts resonated with you well enough that you begin to apply those to the real world again. However, the key thing to note in that extremely verbose and uncharacteristic opening paragraph is with the many constraints of the real world being lifted. Because let's be a little bit honest with ourselves, living in pretty much any popular fictional universe would probably really suck. I am well aware of the isekai genre. As a native Kansan, my modern-day history is deeply tied in with one of the most popular isekai animes of all time, The Wizard of Oz. Fuck me if I had $1 for every time somebody asked me, "Hey, are we in Kansas anymore?" I'd just be able to respond with a solid no because I'd be on a fucking yacht. I digress though. The thing with isekai is that the protagonist usually enters that world with fantastical powers, unfathomably high charisma, absurd plot armor, and a hidden buff that attracts every vaguely feminine humanoid in a 15-mile radius. How do you think a farmer feels about the 29th world-ending threat looming over the horizon while he's struggling to harvest the crops he hastily planted after the 28th defeat? I think it would be pretty damn hard to stay an optimist there. So because of that, one concept that began to sprout and grow in my mind palace's gardens was ranking and analyzing a fictional universe's cities to figure out which ones would be the best and worst to live in as a civilian. There's lots of great universes to do this with, but I decided to roll with World of Warcraft as I was in fact morbidly obese during high school, so I can skip out on most of the required research on the setting. So let's go ahead and get into the qualifications on what I believe makes a good capital city. There will be a lot of overlap in these 4 categories, but firstly I think it's important to analyze its geographical location. How are the neighboring areas? How are relations with those neighboring areas? Is the climate and its conditions suitable? What are some potential upsides and downsides for the city being where it is? And on a militaristic note, if a war were to take place, which isn't strictly uncommon in the world of Warcraft, what strategic strengths could be utilized and what weaknesses could be exploited? How close or far away are allies and enemies? And overall, how defendable is the location? In terms of economics, well, let's go ahead and tie that in with our next category, tie. I couldn't really choose between technology, industry, and economics, so we're going to be running with tie. Anyways, what does the city add to the world and its people? Or really at this point, the universe and its people? How would it fare economically? And if an ally were to be cut off for whatever reason, is the location sustainable on its own? Civilians also tie into tie very heavily. What do people add to the city and its health and longevity? How are civilians being treated in the city? Would people really want to live there? Is the city itself lacking vital infrastructure or assets that may deter potential visitors or residents? And, well, how is the city itself in a vacuum? Then lastly, to tie this all up, political stability. This is the most controversial and subjective category, but look. The Tauren are really fucking chill. They like their elevators, and they like their planes. Hell, even in terms of players, most people will agree that Tauren tend to be, at least on average, one of the nicest races in all of Azeroth. Even in Space Purgatory, Bane's just chilling out in the corner. Dude literally just got bonked by a 40-foot tall super villain and was left to wither away and writhe in torment for all eternity, and all things considered, he took it like a damn champ. The undead, though? Well, they don't really have those same qualities, to put it really lightly. They've definitely been caught in most of the controversies throughout Warcraft. Whether it be the Scourge, their less than ethical interactions with the Alliance, the wacky hijinks revolving around their non-existent reproduction cycle, or their completely uncontroversial and admirable leader, which has only brought love and acceptance from the Warcraft community. The undead just haven't really had the best run in terms of popularity. So basically I'll be analyzing the stability of the local population, and their relationships with other factions or races. Again, there's a lot of overlap in these four categories, but I think it's pretty solid overall. And lastly, before we begin, I'm going to be analyzing these capital cities on screen today, because the list of capitals is surprisingly vast, and you can definitely tell there's a massive disconnect between lore and gameplay when you look at a location like Gadgetzan or Reventusk Village being labeled as a capital. Basically, we'll be covering a list that an average WoW player would be able to compile. So let's go ahead and start off with Stormwind. Easily the most basic capital city out of the lot, but definitely far from the worst. So starting off geographically, Stormwind is actually in a really damn good position. If you look at the playable races of the Alliance, obviously you have the humans in Stormwind, then just to the north you have the dwarves and gnomes, also including the Dark Iron dwarves. Then to the west you have the Mechagnomes from Mechagon and the entire damn naval superpower that is Kultiris. But also when you think about it, the Worgen don't really have a home in Gohmas anymore. The Night Elves don't have a home in Darnassus anymore. Void Elves are Void Elves, and the Lightforged Draenei don't really have a homeland in Azeroth. So although you'll definitely find all of these races out and about, Stormwind is probably the most reasonable answer to where most of these races would be in Azeroth. Hell, even the neutral races are a lot easier to get to from the Eastern Kingdoms compared to Kalimdor. It's also worth noting here that the map of Azeroth isn't like your standard world map. You can't just Columbus your way from the Exodar all the way to Silvermoon. At least as of right now, this map is just one side of Azeroth. We don't know what's on the other side, but it means a trip from Durotar to the Dragon Isles isn't just this casual flight, but a pretty damn intensive trek. To segue that into economics, obviously controlling the area is insanely appealing for trading, especially with Kultiris hanging out right across the street. But the civilians also have access to fertile farmland and plenty of minerals and metals thanks to the nearby dwarves and gnomes in Dunmoreau. Speaking of which, the local tram station can quickly transport people or supplies between Stormwind and Ironforge, and it's a mutually beneficial construction due to the hostility of the zones between the two cities and the inherent strengths and weaknesses of both areas. And I know in a setting with massive airships and literal portals, focusing on a train station in particular may seem a bit bizarre, but honestly there's a pretty massive disconnect between lore and gameplay. Why does a character dying matter if we can just resurrect people at a whim? Well, it's just really rare, I guess. Why isn't there just 1,800 portals leading to every capital city and vital strategic point? Mages, dude. Gotta give them their lunch break. Kirin Work Union will be pissed if we pressure them. Can hardly even request a shipment of conjured mana strudels or water without them getting all high and mighty on you. Oh, can't you conjure your own strudels? No, fuck off. To be fair, there is the Wizard Sanctum with an abundance of, wizards. But even then, I think it's more so for adventurers and travelers rather than civilian functions. So generally, the more simplistic, reliable, and efficient a location's assets are for its citizens, the better. And god damn it, those gnomes know how to make a train track. Also, I know I already talked about how great Stormwind's location is, but it also bears mentioning that all of the reasons that make it great for trade or defense also applies to Stormwind as a capital. It's pretty much the primary hub for the Alliance, and being as sturdy as it is only strengthens the amount of resources and assets that they have access to. With the snowball effect of more and more and more races joining, or at the very least cooperating with the Alliance, at this point it's almost too big to fail. I mean, of course it's WoW, so literally anything could happen. Deathwing 2 Electric Boogaloo may be on the horizon, but what can you do? In terms of civilians and the city itself, there's definitely been some hiccups like the city having a massive refugee crisis with Teldrassil, but really other than that, Stormwind is also really freaking great. Hell, it's actually the capital city that has grown the most, with beautiful parks, harbors, embassies, and more being constructed over the years. They're all welcome changes, and although the districts of Stormwind are rather mundane, it's a city I could easily imagine enjoying myself in. Civilian diversity is great, and you'll never have a shortage of great people to interact with or stories to listen to. And it has pretty much everything you could ever want or need, and more. All in all, Stormwind is about as vanilla as you're going to get, but when compared to future entries we'll be discussing, that's still probably boosted up to a solid 8.5 out of 10 minimum. Plus, standard isn't exactly a bad quality to have. Do you know why things are considered standard or vanilla? Usually because it's safe, it's practical, it's simple to understand, and it's effective. In a world so full of peril and strife around every corner, Stormwind being standard is far from a bad quality to have. Stormwind's great, and although you can definitely dock it down due to the amount of conflicts it finds itself in the center of, it's still a fantastic place to live in, and I really doubt anybody came into this video expecting otherwise. But let's go ahead and head to the other side of the coin with Orgrimmar. Now I'm going to flip the script here and start with political stability because holy fuck, there's been a bit of controversy with the war chiefs. So as an average citizen of Orgrimmar, in the span it takes me to make one of these damn videos, you started off with Thrall leading stuff, and it was pretty good all things considered. It was nice. Then, he gave that leadership position to Garrosh, who eventually went a little bit Cocoa for Cocoa Puffs and casually turned the capital into a near-impenetrable death fortress powered by racism and the blood of an old god, and that required the full strength of the Alliance and the Horde to siege. Then Garrosh went back in time and made his own Horde with blackjack, hookers, and goblins because goblins are really fucking cool. Then he died because the war chief that made him war chief cheated in an honorable duel, and then he lost his powers because honor, I guess. Then the war chief that became war chief after that war chief's death died, and then the war chief that was made war chief after the last war chief died was made war chief because of Super Satan's comic antics and committed a mass genocide and was overall a very mean individual with the help of Super Satan and goblins again. Then that war chief was stopped, and now she's just chilling out in Super Hell, and I guess there's like a war council now? This isn't like a massive conflict that was a persistent issue for generations, mind you. All of this happened in a shorter time frame than the Obama presidency. So overall, Orgrimmar gets like a 1.5 or 2 out of 10 for political stability. And really the only reasons why it's not just a flat out 0 are the facts that the Horde Council seems to be doing alright. And really, I think the memo about war chiefs hasn't just been beaten, but I think the hypothetical dead horse was raised to undeath just to get assaulted again. Going into geography though, it's kind of like an anti-Stormwind in pretty much every way. Militaristically, it's extremely easy to set up an assault, and due to the lack of nearby naval powers to contest a hypothetical landing, it wouldn't even necessarily be difficult to pull off. Like hell, when Garrosh turned Orgrimmar into his personal hyperdeath fortress, he had to pretty much immediately concede the naval defense, despite him having an entire clan of orcs atop fearsome proto-drakes defending the beachfront, one of which being the descendant of Galakrond, a monster so powerful that it was a threat to the entire fucking planet. And there's also this Metal Gear Rising bullshit, but look, all I'm getting at here is that there's a good reason most of the notable Horde victories on Kalimdor in recent years were pretty much just the result of the Horde committing excessive amounts of war crimes. Thrall probably could have picked a lot better of a place than Durotar. But the one main thing that Orgrimmar has going for it is its civilians, and kind of by proxy its economy. Orgrimmar was founded and built up by several different races banding together during times of strife to provide refuge and hopefully prosperity to its people. And even after all of these years, that foundation is still seen to this day. Orgrimmar is a true melting pot that other capital cities can't even compare to. You can hardly even take a step through the city without seeing citizens from different backgrounds and cultures interacting with each other constantly, and it's honestly just really freaking cool. You can take a lap through Stormwind and it's pretty, don't get me wrong, but the valleys of Orgrimmar and the districts of Stormwind are just not comparable. And although I have to dunk a few points in economy as well due to its arid location, its neighboring areas, and just how far away it is from most of the other Horde races, I still have to give it a solid 6 out of 10 just due to the sheer amount of hustle and bustle there is. I know that sounds insane, but if I had to rationalize my thought process, if you were to compare and contrast the two faction capitals, Stormwind has so many advantages over Orgrimmar that it's almost comical. I kind of glossed over it previously, but for example, while the Alliance races are mostly clustered around this area, the Horde is just scattered all over Azeroth, and that makes everything so much worse for them. Especially so since they lost their largest naval superpower, compared to the Alliance's, which is relatively unscathed. Hell, I already talked about the War Chiefs, but even the Alliance has really only had one big shift in leadership thus far. I guess that despite the odds and seemingly everything going against them, the fact that Orgrimmar has not only stood strong, but has only progressively gotten better over the years is very Horde-y. This is turning into an off-topic rant and one that inherently runs contrary to the entire point of this video, but even the Wowpedia reads, "The Horde consists of a coalition of disparate races and cultures loosely joined in an alliance of convenience against a hostile world that would see them destroyed. And in a deliberate sense, that's reflected well in their capital. It isn't great. It has a massive list of flaws, and if you told me you would hate to live in it, I would totally understand why. However, despite everything, the darkest days seem to be behind it, and all of the flaws are things that are either improving or are less potent during times of peace and prosperity. And like I was saying, things seem to only be going uphill for the city. Despite the conditions, I would probably live in Orgrimmar over Stormwind if I was given the choice. I don't think that's necessarily a popular or a rational opinion, but it has so much charm that I'm going to have to give it a C for effort. So let's go ahead and go to Ironforge. In terms of geography, right now it just gets a 10. You may think that's a bit strange considering the fact that Dunmoreau is a snowy tundra, but the citizens seem well accustomed to the conditions. God knows you're not going to have to worry about the chill winds when you're walking through the great stone halls of Ironforge. Loch Madan provides a nice change of scenery, and the Deep Run tram is still a joy. I even think the dwarves got the better trade here, honestly. Dwarves gain access to even more great areas, but also when you think about it, shipments from Stormwind are probably coming from Elwyn Forest, Westfall, or Red Ridge Mountains. Shipments from Ironforge are probably coming from Ironforge, and it just makes trading much more convenient. Also, I know I'm going to be saying the dwarves here. If I'm being honest, I just don't really know what's going on with the gnomes right now. New Tinkertown isn't even a consideration, and I don't even think I need to explain why living in Gnomeregan wouldn't be fantastic. Even when compared to the similarly absent goblins who constructed the masterful city of Crampopolis, I'm sorry, but I still somehow think that might be a better city. I digress though. Since Gnomeregan is doing whatever, I'll be counting Ironforge as a capital for the gnomes and the dwarves. Anyways, Ironforge also just gets a 10 on defendability. I know that's not strictly a category, but you can attack it by sea. They have airfields ready to fend off any attempt at landing nearby. You have to traverse terrible conditions to even reach the gates, especially so if you want to utilize vehicles. And even if you tried, defenders would be ready with artillery cannons, siege engines, airstrikes, mighty warriors, and more. This also isn't even considering having any nearby allies join the fray. You just can't siege Ironforge. Full stop. Also, in regards to Thai, although they don't offer fertile farmland to grow crops on, or strong lumber to build with, they do excel in anything and everything stone or metal. Whether you want a new sword to claim glory with, or a giant robot chicken to ride on to battle, the denizens of Ironforge will have you covered. Also, the nearby allies help alleviate any issues that come up with living in a snowy tundra. Like I said earlier, Elwyn Forest has tons of fertile farmland around it, and logging is a popular occupation in that area. And if you ever need something a little bit more extravagant or exotic, Stormwind has you covered again because of their plentiful harbors and that really freaking cool train track I mentioned. In terms of political stability, honestly the dwarves and gnomes have kind of just been chill. They've had a lot of conflict internally for sure, but it hasn't really affected many other races at large. Gnomeregan was dealt with in a dungeon, and genuinely the only reason it wasn't done and over with all the way back in vanilla is because Blizzard wanted to give the gnomes a new starting experience and basically retconned the death of Thermoplug. I mean, I guess there's the Mechagnomes, but we don't talk about the Mechagnomes. The dwarves have definitely had some internal conflicts as well, with the different clans and the Cult of Ragnaros being pretty prominent highlights, but most of it was dealt with pretty quickly and fairly. I think? It's always kind of hard to tell with WoW. They don't really kill off characters all too often. Sometimes canonically killed characters can just not die, and there's quite a few smash glass in case of emergency characters that they have at the ready. So the statement could age like milk, Ragnaros could come back again fused with Fellfire, but I don't know. In terms of living in Ironforge though, it's not the most visually diverse, but it's supposedly pretty cozy. I know there's inherently concerns with ventilation, heating, and smells. Let's be honest, walking around smoke, fire, and lava all day sounds less than ideal, but reading official descriptions seems to indicate that it's just a nice place to be in. Even when other races traverse through the Great Halls, they very clearly outline that Ironforge is just a relaxing and soothing place to be. I even asked the legendary red shirt guy, which, by the way, please go check out his stuff, he's a cool dude, he is literally in Ironforge, and asked him about potential concerns. From what he said, there may not be any mentions of ventilation in Ironforge, but the only fire that went quote-unquote rampant wasn't even one caused by the forge or lava. It was caused by a brazier getting knocked over and falling on the straw of a griffin's roost, which was really quickly dealt with. Ventilation isn't an impossibility, but at least in my mind, if other races traveled through it and had nothing to say about the air quality or the smells or what have you, it's probably not that bad at worst. However, the same can't be said for living underground. It's cool and all, but living there for an extended period of time hosts a whole slew of mental health issues that you need to be aware of. They're not impossible obstacles to overcome, but you should really consider finding some dwarf friends to go to the taverns with you, plan a trip to Loch Modan, and or find a local gnomish therapist. But all in all, Ironforge is just great. The possible concerns, at least in my mind, are significantly outnumbered by the very real benefits of living there. I'm not going to undermine the possible concerns. If you look at Ironforge and think that you'd rather not live there, what you see is what you get, and if it isn't for you, I think that's a rational assessment. However, I think for your average Joe, it's one of the very best cities to live in, and for everyone else, I think it's still pretty comfortable. So, yeah, good city. Let's move to the other side of the coin, again, with Thunderbluff. Thunderbluff is probably going to be the most basic and simple capital we're going to cover for a while. Political stability, I don't even think I need to discuss. Not once, but twice was the war chief of the Horde actively defied against by the Tauren, and neither time were the Tauren punished. I mean, Bane was imprisoned and Cairn died, but the latter wasn't really the fault of Garrosh. His letter to Magatha is one of my favorite fucking things in all of WoW. I know it's annoying to pause and read a bunch of paragraphs in a YouTube video, but if you have a few seconds to spare, please. Anyways, I digress. My point is, for example, although Bane actually ruined the plans of the war chief and essentially committed treason, Sylvanas didn't go down to Thunderbluff and burn down their easily flammable homes. Nothing ever really happened. Yeah, the effectiveness of a blockade is incredibly effective, and their homeland is extremely susceptible to being raided, but if you're so chill and everyone loves you, literally who cares? I'm not trying to spout some Tauren or big uwu bulls incapable of harm propaganda, because they will absolutely fuck you up if provoked. But simultaneously, everyone loves the Tauren. They're just friends, and they're great. This is even reflected in their player base. Again, I'm not going to claim that all Tauren are essentially Gandhi. If you see a Tauren wielding this shield in particular, you need to fucking run. But I don't think it's controversial to say that, on average, Tauren tend to be some of the most relaxed players in WoW. So, again, although militaristically and geographically they're in a pretty scuffed position, it doesn't really negatively impact the Tauren as much as it should. Also, I know this is another Horde capital I'm kind of undermining the problems of. There's probably going to be some people out there claiming I'm showing favoritism by ignoring the potential issues here. But genuinely, just like Orgrimmar, that's almost the point with Thunderbluff. It has its own problems. If I wasn't brain dead from the aneurysm that Cave Johnson gave me from the Aperture video, I could probably list like 1,000 different OSHA violations here. But aside from the very real possibility of falling to your death, Thunderbluff is really peaceful. As a native Kansan, I'm going to be honest, I'm really biased both for and against Mulgore and Thunderbluff. In a world full of zones like the Storm Peaks, the Azure Span, or Mount Hyjal with perilous and uncontrollable elemental forces raging against towering peaks and jagged cliffs, the concept of just a tranquil plain inhabited by a calm and nomadic people that find comfort in the quiet and peaceful lifestyles provided there is extremely appealing. Let's not beat around the bush, it's really boring. You stare at Mulgore for 5 seconds and you've pretty much seen it all. But is boring necessarily bad? I don't really think so. There's no dungeons, no raids, no battlegrounds. It's just Mulgore. If you want a quiet and peaceful existence around quiet and peaceful people, there's not really a better place to be. Are you somebody who loves the prospect of adventure and likes to live life on the edge? Well, all you're really going to get out of Thunderbluff is a few elevators. Or if the Tauren managed to find some really strong elastic cords, maybe bungee jumping could be a venture someday, but simultaneously, I frequently see people fantasizing about how they'd spend their days here. It's not really for me, but it's definitely the safest answer to that initial prompt of what is the best capital city to live in. What you see is more or less what you get, so if it's your style, definitely go ahead and lead your peaceful existence and ride some elevators. Thunderbluff has you covered. Although I did go ahead and omit one thing in particular when talking about Mulgore, I mentioned that the Tauren are usually a pretty peaceful and nomadic race, and Mulgore is a perfect reflection of that. But if you look over the cliffs, just a few seconds away from Thunderbluff is a heated war zone of... There is a gut-wrenchingly violent battle of... Where's the battle? Did this get removed? I don't know, but back in your olden days, if you managed to fly up here or otherwise see up here with, like, Farsight, for example, all of these animals would engage each other in glorious combat with, like, really dumb-looking helmets and swords, and there was supposed to be a funny joke here, and now it's entirely ruined. Google, help me out here, please. 50 cow jokes that will make you spit up your milk. A cow in an earthquake is called a milkshake. Another day, another dollar. Do you know that Blizzard's favorite race is the Tauren? They think Bull Cowsby is really sweet. Yeah, I guess I'm done here. Rolling over back to the Alliance, we have God damn it. The Exodar. I have to be blunt here. The Exodar really sucks, but it's not really supposed to be good either. Obviously, with it coming out in the Burning Crusade, it's one of the first capital cities ever added through an expansion, and it's literally just a crash-landed ship that the Draenei piloted to escape from their tormentors. And not only that, but that crash landing also caused immense storms that corrupted the surrounding wildlife to such a degree that any and all plagued wildlife had to be slaughtered indiscriminately, generally transforming a beautiful and serene island into a corrupt hellscape full of sick and mutated inhabitants due to the air, ground, and water all being polluted to such a point that a permanent blanket of violent blood-red fog rose over the land isn't exactly seen as a good action. And it's not like it really gets much better, either. After the war against the Legion, most of the Draenei's resources were depleted and were hence unable to support their allies that much during the nearby burning of Teldrassil and or the Thorns, or really the greater battle for Azeroth, which means that the Exodar is the last Alliance bastion on Kalimdor, and it barely even has enough supplies to sustain itself. I mean, despite the fact that it's essentially defenseless against a potential genocide, Sylvanas just ignored it despite being right across the street, and proceeded to do anything else instead. If your existence is so arbitrary that the most beloved protagonist in all of fiction doesn't even bother with a thought of swatting you away, it's not a particularly great sign. As for the Exodar itself, it isn't all doom and gloom. Ultimately, it is still a giant spaceship in a universe that doesn't usually host spaceships, and it does have very peaceful and relaxing qualities to it. But ultimately, unless you really want to live the admittedly very unique lifestyle that it has to offer, there are significantly better options for you to live in. I mean, don't get me wrong, I know there are a lot of fans of the Draenei in the Warcraft community, but I think it's overall a much safer place to visit or go on a vacation to, rather than somewhere you'd want to live in long term. I also can't really include the addendum of ha 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 unless you really want that Sexidar, because if there's one thing that women just really love, it's when weirdos fetishize their race and make unwanted advances. The Exodar really reminds me of South Korea. There's like 5 different reasons that pop in my head immediately, but I'm going to leave that note ambiguous because I think it's more fun to see elaboration. Anyway, if it's something that you're really interested in, I just plan a visit. If you really love it there, great, I'm sure the residents will be more than happy to have you around. Otherwise, there's better options out there, Captain. After that, though, let's go ahead and visit Silvermoon. Although it's nowhere near as bad as the Exodar, this is definitely a zone that's in need of an update. If you've ever gone here and hopped onto your favorite flying mount just to spam the spacebar over and over again and question whether or not your dragon needs special education, it's not because Blizzard just forgot about it when they added flying to the game. This is why. Yeah. Plus all the arcane golems are referencing events from over 16 years ago, and there's just a fucking slave operation going on in the tailor shop? What? Blizzard, I don't see any damn fruit bowls, where's the QA department? Memes aside, however, unlike the Sexidar, Silvermoon is actually a pretty great place to live in. But you essentially need to read into the lore and completely ignore its current state. We'll get into that in just a minute, but for now, let's talk about the boring stuff. Geographically, Cael'Thalas is pretty isolated. With the burning of Teldrassil, I can't claim it's the most isolated capital on Azeroth anymore, but it's still a pretty close second, with their closest neighbors being the undead in the Undercity, which all things considered is also pretty damn isolated. That's not strictly a bad thing for our Blood Elf friends, though. Isolation is kind of a key trait for a lot of them, and it's even reflected in the player count of Silvermoon. I also know I talked about portals being kind of hit or miss within Warcraft lore, but obviously some cities have more magical inhabitants than others, and I'd assume Silvermoon has a pretty high density of mages. So it's definitely easier for them to receive imports or assistance through magic when compared to a city like Thunderbluff. Honestly though, unlike their Forsaken friends, the Blood Elves are probably in the best location they can be in the Eastern Kingdoms. It's no Kultiris, but their navy is in a pretty good position. And on that note, the Blood Elves actually have things of value to export, unlike another certain capital city, and they're as far away from the Alliance they can be on the continent. Defensively, they're really solid, and to be blunt, if the Eastern Kingdoms were to be in conflict again, the Undercity and Lordaeron are probably going to be targeted first. And after that, you only really have one direction you can assault Cael'Thalas through. And despite what Arthas would probably make you believe, any potential assault would be able to be heavily fortified extremely quickly. So being a civilian in Silvermoon feels about as safe as you can get on the continent. But how is actually living there? Well, luckily in terms of living in this area, it's just really damn beautiful and enjoyable. Again, this is something that isn't conveyed well in-game, but the Blood Elves as a people have been on nothing but an upward climb since the Burning Crusade. With their race's introduction into WoW, they were a people who recently got obliterated by Arthas, had their main fount of power tainted, which drove them insane with an insatiable addiction, and their introduction to the Alliance was so hostile that it only set their race back further into desperation. Desperation so dire and seemingly hopeless that they began to channel demonic energies and eventually transformed the Sunwell into a demonic gateway to summon those who may be able to help their plight. Or more realistically, take advantage of them. Since then though, the Blood Elves joined the Horde, which treated them significantly better than the Alliance ever did. The lands lost to them were reclaimed, the tainted Sunwell was restored with holy light which helped the Blood Elves considerably and relieved their race's addiction. Their newly appointed leader, Lorthamar, has just been a badass for his people, leading them toward a brighter tomorrow, and Kael'thas has just been consistently rebuilding over the last few years with very little standing in the way of their hopes. I'd say it would overtake Orgrimmar on the Best City on the Rise title, but it hasn't just been on the rise, it's been rising for a while now. It may never reach the same glory it had many years ago, but fuck, it's hard not to be patriotic. Speaking of which, in regards to living in Blood Elf land, it's genuinely great right now. I already said that it's extremely safe, but the Blood Elves are a proud, noble, and patriotic race, and you can see that reflected in their architecture and culture. Like walking through Silvermoon, you're going to see lots of bright, regal, and extravagant colors that demand your attention with magic seamlessly blended into its extravagance. And despite what some people may tell you, the Blood Elves aren't necessarily arrogant or pompous. Their history is full of sacrifice and strife, and their sheer resilience to persevere led them to adopting a more modest and somewhat formidable attitude. I mean, if you want to be a really pretty boy or really pretty girl, there's definitely options and you'll probably find a crowd to fit in with. But there's a lot of variance in the population's demeanor and personality to be sure. Also, honestly, if you're an introverted person that runs on an extroverted social battery, Silvermoon is quite possibly the best place for you to fit in, with lots of intriguing ceremonies and events to partake in, but also a lot of calm and soothing elements that you can relax yourself with if you need some time to cool down. All in all though, I don't think this is controversial, but thus far, I think Silvermoon is the best city we've covered. I really don't think there's any glaring flaws. In the 4 categories I listed at the beginning of this video, Silvermoon doesn't just meet expectations, it completely surpasses them. So for now, in this incredibly arbitrary tier list I added into the video for no reason, we're going to go ahead and put Silvermoon at the top of S. It's a really damn good city. Lastly, for Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms is the Undercity. Do I even need to explain this? Yeah? Alright, fine, let's go over the positives. Firstly, city layout. I know I just managed to collectively piss off pretty much everybody who navigates this hell city, but I'm going to have to bust out some credentials. As the one and only person on the entire planet who navigated this city entirely blind because of my sick Ultimate Demon Hunter immersion mod, I think I'm qualified to say that you're entirely correct. As a player, this layout kinda fucking sucks. I had such a hard time finding the elevator system that I eventually just gave up and flew away. But as a citizen, it's actually pretty damn good. You have your center ring full of important people to interact with, a la your bankers, guild masters, flight masters. You have the inner ring surrounding that with even more important people, most of which are merchants filling an economical purpose, aka the auction house. Seriously, there's like 1,000 fucking auctioneers here and this one chef. I really don't know if Blizzard keeps track of this, but I would genuinely love to know which one gets the most sales, because it's not even hyperbole to say that you're never out of sight of one if you're in this ring. I digress though. You have an outer ring around the auction ring with more specific merchants, like your regent vendors, profession trainers, specific weapon vendors, and a panda. Look, I can't figure out where else to segue this. Something that Blizzard has been doing a lot more recently is filling old cities with more and more civilians, which is really cool. But sometimes you get these really jarring scenarios where you can blatantly tell what dude was around since vanilla, and what player just strolled on in with 99 orange parses throughout the entire expansion and 5 different Blood Elf E waifus. There's just a fucking panda here, sitting here punching the wind next to 3 barrels of booze, and I can't help but feel sad for the poor girl. She doesn't even like the booze that's offered here. Anyways, outside of those rings is the Magic, War, and Rogue's Quarters, as well as the Apothecarium. One of these is not like the other, one of these just does not belong. Actually, let's talk about the Apothecarium a little bit. The Apothecarium has some weirdo sissy hypnosis bullshit going on with mind slaves that were not just tortured, but lobotomized and lost the will to defy their captors and are cursed to perform arbitrary tasks with full obedience and consciousness. Sorry. Dominating a pet with torture until they break into becoming a subservient mind slave isn't something you can exactly turn into a bowl of fruit. I meant to say that they're dominating an experiment. Dominating an experiment with torture until they become a subservient experiment. Suddenly, the panda is starting to make a lot more sense. Alright, so Blizzard fixed that one. Let's cover the rest of the positives. If you're an undead, the death sludge and terrible living conditions aren't quite as terrible. Hell, if you really want to channel your inner Blizzard employee, you may even be able to dominate your very own experiment. I guess you have a unique history to explore and engage yourself in, since you're in the Ruins of Lordaeron. There's bats. I think bats are pretty neat. Yeah, I think that's all there really is to say. Shatter. Oh wait, yeah, shit, the city was blighted. Huh. Well, call me Daenerys, because I kinda forgot about that, to be honest. Well, this is going to be an opportunity— Hey, Bug. Bug, I'm recording, buddy. Go play with your alligator, okay? Okay. I juked you with comic antics earlier. I'm going to cover both Darnassus and the Undercity, even though the latter is uninhabited, and— I mean, I guess the former is too, but you know what I mean. I still won't be covering Gelneus or Kazan though, just because they haven't received any updates, and honestly, I really doubt anyone has ever woken up, rolled over begrudgingly, sighed, and thought to themselves, man, I just wish I lived in Kazan. So, let's go to Treeland. To start off, I need to make a statement with political stability, and I'm bringing this up because it's extremely relevant even outside of Teldrassil. The Night Elves genuinely just aren't having a great time. I'd say they may even be on par with the Draenei for the title of playable race that has gotten fucked over the most. I mean, for example, just take a look at the world trees. Nordrassil? Yeah, that was nearly destroyed by Archimonde, but was only extremely damaged, and was also eventually under siege by Ragnaros many years later. Andrassil had to be destroyed by the same druids that planted it, since it was corrupted by the old god's presence. Shaladrassil in the Broken Isles was corrupted by the Emerald Nightmare, and Teldrassil was burnt to a crisp alongside a massive percentage of the Night Elf population, while their goddess Elune was like, "Oh yeah, I didn't save the Night Elves because I wanted to help you out." All the Night Elf souls went straight to Super Hell?
Whoopsie, lol, hashtag Scorpio thing, so relatable, teehee x3333.
Now, there's a distinct possibility of a new world tree being planted on the Dragon Isles. And normally I would want to stray away from speculation, but N'Zoth could be up to his comic antics again. There's a point in the Dragonflight campaign where you're transported back in time to the Black Empire, and while you're in the Black Empire, all the old gods are whispering to you. However, the only one with any new dialogue is N'Zoth, who happens to just say,
"I know you. What you were. What you will yet be. Deeper its roots will reach. Welcoming our embrace."
Yeah, I mentioned it already, but Blizzard isn't exactly one to hesitate from protecting the break glass in case of emergency characters. Considering Blizzard's hate boner for the Night Elves, the Naga showing up here and there, and the absurdly unremarkable ending to N'Zoth's reign, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that we may see another world tree fall into conflict. I really don't want that to happen, but I also wouldn't really be surprised. Also, this isn't really taking into account all the other incidents that have occurred in their race's history, but honestly, if you want to watch a video that goes over that in more depth, I would genuinely recommend watching PlatinumWoW's video on the topic. It was uploaded while I was voicing over this video, and it pretty much says everything I could say on the topic, and more. But despite everything I just said, once you get over Sylvanas' plan to become the single largest supplier of charcoal in Azeroth in Blizzard's continuous curb stomping of their lore, Darnassus is really nice. Kinda. Admittedly, the city layout is rather bizarre with lots of room for improvement. Teldrassil has absolutely no minerals in it, which requires them to be extremely reliant on trading, which isn't exactly helped by being a 1,000-meter tall tree. The neighboring zones around you are also not very exceptional and have also been getting screwed over routinely. Your only allied neighbor is a makeshift city of crash-landed alien space goats. Defensively, you have absolutely no merit. Look, what you see is what you get. As an anti-zoomer who played this game at a young age, loading into Teldrassil for the first time on the shitty family PC is a gaming moment that's unforgettable. It's not even hyperbole to state that it literally changed the trajectory of thousands of lives. But when you look at it in a vacuum, it's just not the greatest place to live. That's not to say that it's bad by any stretch of the imagination. God no, it's still like a B+ minimum. But I guess the features that make it stand out are features that are applicable to all of Night Elven society rather than Darnassus in particular. And honestly, a lot of the faults that Night Elven society have are also slightly exemplified here as well. I know you can say that for other races and cities, but if it makes sense, I can't really think of an equivalent to Orgrimmar or Ironforge. But there's quite a lot of cities that offer the same charm that you'd get out of Teldrassil. The Night Elves are really just cool though. Honestly, it's really sad to see how far they've fallen, but their cities are very peaceful, harmonic, beautiful, and relaxing. A lot of the same qualities I was talking about in Thunderbluff are applicable here. Although I think in contrast to Vitorin, the Night Elves have a much more adventurous and maybe even emotional twist to them. There's a lot to love, and despite their race's troubled history, I genuinely believe that there may come a day where they finally get their chance to rebuild. And when they're given that chance, just like the Blood Elves, I think it's going to be extremely hard to not share a mutual feeling of cautious optimism with them. If, or really hopefully when that day becomes a reality, I will proudly claim that their new capital is probably going to be an S minimum. But unfortunately, that day is not today. In the meantime, if you want my personal recommendation, I really love Feathermoon Stronghold personally. It's not exactly a capital, but I would still probably throw it up in A, hypothetically. Anyways, Blizzard, please just fucking let the Night Elves have a break. Shattrath. Honestly, if you were to copy and paste the Exodar section, quite a lot of it would directly apply to Shattrath. It's an abandoned and damaged Draenei city that only inhabits desperate and dangerous souls that sought refuge from the terrible living conditions in the Outlands and made their way here. It is significantly worse though, because at least the Exodar was an Azeroth. At least the Exodar had peaceful and relaxing qualities to it, and at least the Exodar had a hospitable population. Geographically, Shattrath gets a fucking LL out of 10, with the only real redeeming quality being Nagrand. Which, don't get me wrong, is Nagrand, but that doesn't really help out Shattrath in particular. Economically, Shattrath contributes pretty much nothing. Pretty much nobody is really happy in Shattrath, and the only lore developments we've gotten in recent expansions is that Shattrath is still dangerous and that portals were opened there. Woo. Just don't. I honestly wouldn't even advise tourism because you'll probably get shanked and robbed. Like, imagine choosing to live in Chernobyl, but instead of it being abandoned and mostly silent, there's a bunch of thugs and extremists who want to steal your kneecaps that patrol the area out of despair. Oh my god, Shattrath is literally Stalker. Yeah, did you play through this game and think you wanted to live there? No? Okay, then don't go to Shattrath. Just go to fucking Dalaran, I guess. Now, despite what I just said, in terms of political stability, Dalaran is kinda fucky. So, in terms of history, just like Silvermoon, it got absolutely dunked on by Arthas, but unlike Silvermoon, it also got absolutely dunked on by Archimonde, and that wasn't particularly great. But eventually, after some years, the survivors eventually returned to Dalaran and transported it to Northrend to eventually be used as a forward base of operations for the Horde and Alliance against the Lich King. The Lich King was defeated, and then for the first time in many, many years, Dalaran was in peace. Until Jaina showed up, started purging the Horde from the city, ended a 2,000-year-old alliance with Silvermoon, and overall made things kinda awkward. Afterwards, the Burning Legion showed up in the expansion Legion, and Jaina wanted to move the city over Deadwind Pass to protect the Eastern Kingdoms. Actually, let's go ahead and there. The Eastern Kingdoms. Then when the Kirin Tor went, hey, Jaina, I know the Horde did some, comic antics, but the Burning Legion is kind of a big threat. I think we should let the Horde back in to help us. She didn't really like that and she left. She also ended her relationship at the time over the decision, and overall it just wasn't very happy. But Dalaran was then transported to the Broken Isles, and rather predictably, being right next to the Tomb of Sargeras and right under fucking Argus, the desolate homeworld of the Burning Legion kinda sparked a little bit of dread in people. I'm not saying this to say that it wasn't useful. Obviously it helped out immensely. But there's being a pessimist, then there's being a pessimist who got their home invaded by both Hitler and Satan, then being transported to Hitler's front doorstep, then being transported to Satan's front doorstep, and then being transported straight in front of Super Hell. Things have been a little bit dire. And honestly, who knows if it'll ever be used for that same purpose again. And who knows if conflicts will flare up again internally. So, generally being a citizen in Dalaran is debatably the most unsafe option yet. As much as Dalaran finds itself in the center of conflict, when the city holds, you're realistically pretty damn safe. If that'll always be the case is an entirely different question, but I digress. In terms of the city itself, it's one of those instances where I'm just going to have to say, if it's something you really like, you're gonna love it there. It is incredibly unique. But if you plan to live there, you need a lot more than just liking the aesthetics to truly appreciate your time. I don't want to paint the picture that Dalaran is bad, because it is not. It's far from it. It's genuinely great. Especially if you're a mage, or overall just somebody who really wants to learn about the world and its mysteries, there's no better place to be. Dalaran doesn't necessarily strike me as pompous either. Although some of the most knowledgeable and powerful mages call this their home, there's still room for the cooks. There's still room for medics, tailors, blacksmiths, innkeepers, bankers. If we're being blunt, it's probably one of the most lucrative places to work in from a financial standpoint. If you're spending night and day improving upon and researching arcane magic, you probably don't have a lot of time available to figure out how to make a robe or how to maintain a Ford F-150. There's a lot of demand for people from every walk of life. And because of that, this is a fantastic place to live in if you're a specialist. Especially because those skills will always be able to be utilized or possibly even demanded. It can be a very lucrative, high-risk, high-reward work location. And generally, if you're willing to leave your home behind, the risks of living in Dalaran are significantly alleviated. But if you don't have an art or craft or a skill that you're particularly exceptional in, I don't think you want to be a retail worker in Dalaran is all I'm saying. And if you're somebody who would prefer to stay in one location their entire life, whether it be friends or family or just the desire to build up a nest, there is literally no worse place to stay. But if the potential of Dalaran appeals to you, you're going to absolutely love it. But if it's just a passing interest, just like some other locations on this list, I would really advise planning a vacation rather than staying there. Any way to transition into something on a similar note? Geography? It's pretty good, I guess. As for the city itself, honestly, other than Silvermoon, it's probably the capital that has had the biggest downgrade from the lore to the actual game, sadly. However, while Silvermoon is because of the city's rapid expansion and ample opportunity to rebuild, Dalaran is just small. Spelled with an O-L instead of all. Small. Like, the height aspect is definitely there, the towering spires and architecture look goddamn fantastic, and the sense of scale is really there. But compared to other capitals, Dalaran is just insanely tiny. I mean, to be fair, this does make it best for one of every WoW player's favorite pastimes, mindlessly running in circles in a capital city for no reason, but just look at some of the official artwork of Dalaran. I can actually imagine people living here. Like, there are more sights to see and things to do than visit a bunch of profession shops and player utilities. I could imagine a student life here with all the upsides and downsides that can come from that. I kind of struggle to figure out where I can even sleep here. I mean, there's the underbelly, I guess. I wouldn't necessarily dock a numerical point for its inclusion, but it's the underbelly. I would struggle to really call it a good feature. All in all though, Dalaran is a mixed bag, but it's definitely our first mixed bag where I think the pros definitely can outweigh the cons. It's a unique experience, but unlike some of the last cities I've described as a unique experience as a token gesture, I think this one really earns its title. If you live here, I think you very realistically need a backup plan and the ability to let go, whether it be financially, emotionally, or otherwise. But if you can make it work out, there's a lot to see and a lot to do. You can quite literally see the entire world here. And if you want to be a mage or just a knowledgeable scholar, there's very few places that are as good as Dalaran. Also, if you're extremely proficient in a trade and you want to work in a location that can be potentially lucrative, you probably also want to sign up here. However, again, I would really advise staying away if you're just an average Joe. And if you're somebody who would prefer to stay in one location your entire life, there is literally no worse city to choose. But if the potential of Dalaran appeals to you, it's going to be wonderful for you. If you just have a passing interest, I would recommend choosing a different city. To actually address this terrible addition to the video in a constructive way, I would definitely throw it in the B tier for having extremely good qualities while simultaneously having some very extreme drawbacks. Middle of the pack overall, but you could very easily sway me into believing it's a personal S or a personal F. For the most part though, it's a pretty damn good city. Up next, hidden within the mysterious continent of Pandaria is the Shrine of 2 Moons and Shrine of 7 Stars. For the first time, I kind of feel like evaluating the shrines based off of their own merit is somewhat disingenuous, as they feel more akin to a city like Shattrath or Dalaran with a permanent population, but there have been periods in its lifetime where its population has spiked due to events or conflicts happening nearby. However, unlike Shattrath that's residing within a desecrated, lost-dying world, or Dalaran that's probably destined to return to the front lines of whatever conflict lies next, Pandaria is relatively peaceful. Obviously, the events of Mop added a lot of tension, a few temples got bonked by the Legion, and N'Zoth's fun excursion to the continent was far from ideal, but for the most part, Pandaria has been very relaxed. With the exception of the Dread Wastes, obviously, and the Vale of Eternal Blossoms, right next to where the shrines are. They've kind of been on the front lines of almost all of the conflicts relating to the continent, which really harms them in particular. They're still not the worst cities by any means, in fact they're still pretty damn good. But I do think they're actually one of the worst cities in Pandaria. So instead of zeroing in on the shrines, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to look at Pandaria as a whole. I know that's somewhat unfair to the other capital cities I've criticized, but I feel like the difference, again, is where the shrines inhabit the continent it resides on. Contrast it with the other towns within the continent where the most dire conflict they'll face is a bunch of monkeys stealing their beer. It's just not really the same. Anyways, rather predictably, I think the answer to, is Pandaria a great place to live in, is a resounding yes, obviously. If you want to play devil's advocate, we haven't really checked up on our panda friends recently, but if it's been rather quiet, judging by their culture and traditions, I can only assume it's going well. There is a book on Pandaria coming very soon, so this could be dismissed in the future, but I really doubt it. I mean, hell, future Davey coming in here, but while I was making this video, we actually went back to Pandaria for a questline, and rather predictably, the person we went there for didn't want to leave. They loved it there. They thought it was great. When combined with the fact that they're a motherfucking dragon and could literally live wherever they wanted, that's a pretty good sign. Also, to kind of continue this trend, if you look at the geography, Pandaria is definitely the most isolated region in all of Azeroth, but that's really not a bad thing. This isolation led to the Pandaren brewing a very colorful and rich culture and history that just wouldn't have been possible if they lived close in proximity to the Eastern Kingdoms or Kalimdor, for example. Plus, unlike other continents, although it definitely has its areas that have seen brighter days, for the most part Pandaland is beautiful and serene. You have the rolling, bountiful farmlands of the Valley of the Four Winds, the vibrant colors of the lush jade forest, and the gorgeous blend of towering mountains, golden plains, and reinvigorating coasts of Kunlai. And I really could go on and on. It is so beautifully diverse, and even exploring a quarter of the continent will take you to so many different and beautiful vistas that the appeal isn't to be understated. Also, unlike other continents, most of the conflicts that were dealt with here were either dealt with entirely or significantly weakened, which makes it feel very self-contained, but in a good way. The Pandaren did well enough on their own for years, and although they were facing stagnation, they didn't join the Alliance and the Horde out of desperation. This could be entirely wrong, but I personally think they would have been fine, if not better off without us entering Pandaria. And I think that's really neat. Also, to mention economics again, this is probably one of the very best continents on a sheer geographical note. The Valley of the Four Winds is easily the best zone for farming in the entire game, and it's not even fucking close. You have plenty of great places to gather stone, ore, metal, lumber. You have plenty of options for meat. There's not really any resources that they're lacking in, and they're in a prime position for trading. If there is a good trading port in Kunlai or the Jade Forest, for example, Pandaria would easily be the biggest economical superpower in the entire planet. However, I do eventually have to circle back to the shrines. You probably shouldn't live there. It's not abhorrent, it'd still make it pretty high up on the list, but when compared to some place you could live in Kunlai, the Jade Forest, the Valley of Four Winds, or even Krasarang Wilds and Townlong Steppes, it's definitely the worst off, and although the Vale was beautiful once upon a time, it's impossible to ignore the toll that all of the conflicts have brought upon the area. Just like Darnassus, if we're going with exclusively the shrines, I'm gonna have to give them like a low B or a high C, but if you wanted to go anywhere else on the continent, I would easily give it an S. No matter what you're looking for, you're going to have something really nice to look forward to here, and Pandaria is just good. Really good. S tier. 5 stars. Up next, Dazar'Alor. I had to throw this in at some point and didn't really know where, but during the process of making this video, I made a WoW subreddit post because I wanted to hear thoughts on cities that I may have undermined or overmined, and I have to say that Dazar'Alor was probably the single city that shifted the most for me personally. Because if you played Horde in BFA, the city was a fucking nightmare to navigate. Nowadays, it's less of an issue since there's no Pathfinder, and in fact you automatically learn flying nowadays. But holy shit, running around this city on foot was probably the most tedious a capital has ever been. Especially since there's actually a fair amount of enemies that you may accidentally aggro, and there isn't even a fucking auction house. So if you didn't have a Brutosaur or weren't an engineer, you'd have to go to an entirely different capital city or log onto an alt and mail stuff over. Because of that, for a lot of BFA, Dazar'Alor was just this one room and really nothing more. There were exceptions, but honest to god, it's almost like Blizzard tactically placed every vital location and vendor as far away from each other as humanly possible just to be an annoyance. If you legitimately went back in time and told me that Bobby Kotick specifically requested a capital city were to be built where all of the vital infrastructure was as far away from each other as possible to artificially increase playtime, I'd believe you. I wouldn't be surprised. It was awful. Anyways, with all that said, Dazar'Alor is actually a pretty good city. Yeah, like I said, people really managed to sell me on it after some retrospection. Anyway, geographically, it's pretty isolated, but again, that makes a lot of sense because trolls. The Zandalari are nowhere near the same level of power they were during their apex, but that's not really saying an immense amount. I mean, when you're at the pinnacle of a family tree that stretches across most of Azeroth and you still manage to be a pretty formidable faction, you're doing something right. We're going to talk about that in more depth in just a second. But holy hell, you have to be a cardio legend to see the sights, but they are definitely worth it. I'm sorry, but there is only one city in Azeroth where you can chill out on a beautiful, sunny beach with a bunch of dinosaurs and fly to your home in a giant golden pyramid on a damn pterodactyl. I will concede that Nazmir and Vol'dun are pretty much complete misses, and you're better off never traversing outside of Zuldazar, unless you want to hang out with some furries and scalies, but... I'm sorry, but there's only one city in Azeroth where you can chill out on a beautiful sunny beach with some dinosaurs, and in terms of the civilian population, it's a lot of trolls. There's some turtles. Furries and scalies thrown in there too. But it's mostly just trolls. And trolls are pretty neat. You kinda have to deal with some casual, at times bordering on competitive ranked racism, but if you like the trolls, you like Dazar'Alor. And I think trolls are pretty neat. I know this is ludicrously one note, but it's Zandalar. And here's the thing. The Zandalari are absurdly resilient. Like, let me paint a picture here. The Battle of Dazar'Alor. As always, the Horde just didn't have a good time with the Golden Fleet pretty much evaporating, Dazar'Alor taking pretty heavy damage. King Rostikon died, which was a pretty heavy hit to morale. It doesn't particularly help that he sealed his entire bloodline to the Loa of Death, and his daughter's rise to becoming a queen was interrupted by a formidable protest. Yet, despite all of that happening in such a short time frame, Dazar'Alor and the Zandalari Empire is still standing tall. And that right there is almost a perfect encapsulation of the Zandalari. Like, let's just take a moment to forget about the fucking elves, let's take a look at the Zandalari Empire. A titanic Cathraxi Warbringer was awakened, bringing with it an army of Akir to lead against the trolls to destroy their empire for the old gods, and after a conflict that spanned thousands of years, they managed to hold strong and emerge triumphant. Even when its death completely annihilated a lush jungle to be an inhospitable wasteland forever, they managed to hold on. The Night Elves systematically annihilated the trolls while they were rapidly expanding across the world, yet they still held on. The entire world fucking exploded, their empire was fragmented and countless lives were lost to the devastation, yet they still held on. After that, there was a civil war which ultimately led to Hakar being summoned, with it bringing a blood plague which also devastated the Zandalari's numbers, yet they still held on. They formed an alliance with the Imani trolls, who had a conflict with the High Elves that eventually culminated in an invasion that failed because a horrific firestorm summoned by the first human mages in history ravaged their ranks and forced them to retreat. Yet they still held on. Hakar came back to life and more infighting occurred. They still held on. Then we get to WoW, where over the course of many expansions you proceed to kill them repeatedly. They still held on. Deathwing emerged and caused such an amount of devastation to the city of Dazar'Alor that the city was in ruins and the temple was so badly damaged that it was leaning. The Zandalari still fucking held on. A large chunk of the Zandalari joined Lei Shin in an attempt to rebirth their glorious empire. They all died, the empire held on. Then we get to BFA, and guess fucking what? That Cathraxi Warbringer I mentioned at the beginning blasted the damn city, the Battle of Dazar'Alor happened and made them suffer considerable losses again, and they still fucking held on. And this isn't even covering all of it. There is a lot more to unpack here, but just this meme. This goddamn meme, but with trolls and elves. To say they're resilient is an understatement. Nothing gets them down. I legitimately think there's an alternative universe out there where the Jailer succeeded in his plan to dominate all life, except for the Zandalari Empire, who still manages to be a consistent thorn in his side for all eternity, thus sparking the beginning of World of Warcraft 2: A Realm Reborn. I just don't think there's ever going to be a scenario where Dazar'Alor or Zuldazar fall. And you know what? With that in mind, I'm pretty happy knowing that is the only city in all of Azeroth where you can relax on a sunny, beautiful, harmonious beach with a bunch of dinosaurs and fly back to your home in a giant golden pyramid on a pterodactyl. I wouldn't necessarily give it S tier because they've kind of had to deal with a lot, but anything less than an A is psychotic. Up next, let's go ahead and go to Boralus. Now I have a bit of research to do here, as I've genuinely never played an Alliance character through the story of Battle for Azeroth. I adore the Kultirans, and I am so thankful I finally have access to them because I'm going to create some absolute monstrosities with this power. But really, I would rather drown than do the entirety of Kultiras without flying. So, let me just go ahead and take a trip through Boralus and see how it is. I'll see you back in a little bit due to the power of editing magic. Why is this so fucking good? Look, I literally just finished sucking off Dazar'Alor, but you're telling me I had to navigate this 18,000 foot tall pyramid with the most inconvenient city layout humanly conceivable? And you guys got this? This is one of the biggest compliments I can give in this video, but I genuinely think that Boralus may be the single most functional city in the entire game. Now, to backpedal that a little bit, functional isn't exactly a synonym for good, but when it comes to practically every other city on this list, you have to fill in the blanks a lot. You look at a place like Orgrimmar, and you know that Durotar is not exactly prime real estate for planting crops, but boars? Boars can live in Durotar. There's lots of ways you can eat boars. So there's a lot of boar farms because boars are delicious. Mulgore though? Not as many boars there. There are some boars, but not as many as you'd probably hope. However, the Tauren do know how to make some fantastic bread, and safe to say that the two races combined can probably make a kick-ass burger. You take a look at Boralus though, and you understand everything at a glance. It's the naval superpower of Azeroth, and until WoW needs to make another expansion to bonk Kultiras even farther away, it's in a prime position to utilize its naval supremacy. And to transition this into the civilians and their culture, this may be objectively incorrect for me to say, but as someone who lives in a small Midwestern town, it kind of gives me similar vibes to that. I'm about as landlocked as you can get in this country, so I don't have much experience fishing or sailing, but what I mean by that is it's a very close-knit community of quaint and honestly kind of intimidating people. I simultaneously feel extremely unwelcome and out of place here, but I also have a feeling that the friendships formed here are extremely sincere and cherished. The people here had to have been extremely skilled at what they do to get as far as they have collectively, but as a borderline introvert that's reliant on a fluctuating extroverted social battery, that's kind of fucking scary. But if you're more extroverted, socially charged, or really just want a very small but tight-knit friend group, this is probably a paradise for you. Of course, this kind of applies to every city, and I'm not going to pretend that I've been analyzing them under the lens of a tired college student who lives in their room all day to avoid the harsh concept of basic human socialization, but I guess this looks like the most busy city I've covered thus far, and introversion seems to be really challenged here. Like, I don't really think there's any job I can see doing here that doesn't involve you dealing with tons of people in one way or another. And I also can't really think of any location that's relatively quiet or peaceful. Hell, Dazar'Alor has plenty of quiet and scenic views to take in, and even Orgrimmar has enough civilian diversity that you could probably find a good and quiet location to call home. I just don't really see that happening in Boralus, but at this point I need to loop back to, I feel like the friendships formed here are extremely sincere and cherished, because nothing I said thus far is inherently a bad thing. From my limited experience questing and visiting here, I think the people here are great, but it might be a very hard nut to crack, and that's something I'd actively keep in mind if you wanted to move here. In terms of the city itself, I already mentioned that I think it's extremely functional and easy to understand entirely at a glance. Although I guess to be fair, if I'm wrong, this is literally an entirely new segment. But I also think it's really beautiful. I'm sure you could make the case that it's somewhat standard. I've definitely seen some other cities in different fictional universes that look extremely similar. However, fuck it, I'm just gonna point this sign again. Anyways, political stability. In recent years, it's not had a great run, but from what we've seen so far, it seems to have recovered significantly. From what I know, you kind of just arrive when the political pot begins to boil over. But it seems like most of the issues were either resolved or significantly alleviated. So that means less baggage carried into the future, and that's obviously a good thing. Geographically, it's, again, one note. They're naval superpowers, so all the things I would come to expect from a naval superpower are here. Drustvar may be a complete miss. I've done enough questing in the production of this video to get a feel for Stormsong and Tiergard, but judging by the sentence on Wowpedia stating, in the absence of House Waycrest, Drustvar's contribution of arms and sausages have begun to dry up, I think we're looking at an uninhabitable wasteland of depression and misery here. Are things better after BFA? Probably, I don't know, so let's just assume that, like, 2/3 or 3/4 of the continent is really good. I know that doesn't sound very impressive, but just like Pandaland, I'd consider anything above a 50 to 60% ratio pretty solid. Compare it to Zandalar's 33% or Northrend's, I'd honestly go with probably 40%. It's pretty good. Sucks that the Broken Isles capital literally isn't there anymore because damn, that's a really good continent there. Oh yeah. Damn it, Blizzard, please just turn Suramar into an actual city someday. Please. Anyways, back on topic, Kultiris I think just gets a high A or a low S. I'll stick it in high A to be on the safe side, but honestly, I could be easily convinced to put it in S. It's really, really nice, and the future only looks brighter for its denizens, and... Have I mentioned that it's a naval superpower? 'Cause it is. Do you remember back in elementary school when you or another kid got into an argument with another kid about which of their favorite superheroes or fictional characters would win in a fight? And it's just an infinite fucking loop of, well, actually, I block your solar bombardment I-beam with my cape of anti-solar bombarding, or whatever the fuck. Yeah, Oribos is just gonna be that. In terms of the city itself, it gets a solid who the fuck cares out of 10. Usually the city itself is going to be barren, and as a civilian, you're not going to be staying there long. You're not a Paul Blart mall walker, and after the events of Shadowlands, you're probably just going to get sent to whatever afterlife awaits you. One misconception I do want to get out of the way is that you don't just have a choice between Revendreth, Maldraxxus, Ardenweald, or Bastion. There's a potentially infinite number of afterlives out there, some of them being vital to the functions of the Shadowlands as a whole and bustling with activity, while others may be specifically curated to a single individual. And the Shadowlands also transcends all realities, so even if you were to die on a different planet, or even a different timeline or dimension, your soul would still go there eventually. Is any of this really portrayed well at all? Not really. Shadowlands bad give up votes? Yeah. So with that said, if I wanted to go for algorithm bait, I'd just go, what city would you want to live in for the rest of eternity? Cause it's potentially an option. But that'd be silly, and I would never do that. Anyway, what city would you want to live in for the rest of eternity? Oribos just gets its very own tier. It's objectively Oribos of all time. Get me out of here. Now let's finish off this video with Valdrakken. Now a huge, bold, Comic Sans disclaimer here with at least 18,000 huge, bold Comic Sans exclamation marks. As of releasing this video, we are currently at 10.1.5, so if Valdrakken gets nuked or if the city gets fucked over one way or another, I couldn't have known that. Sometimes viewers don't understand what the concept of time is, and although it isn't frustrating per se, like, realistically the most I can feel is slight disappointment, I just want to say that outright. So anyways, Valdrakken. It's really fucking nice. Finishing off on a real high note, to be honest. Like, look at this. How can you not love this? It's adorable. The little bronze whelps are playing in the sandbox, all the ruby whelps are chasing each other and being little rascals, the blue whelps are reading books, and all the emerald whelps are taking a little nap in their little beds with the little toys. There's even fucking story time, with all the whelps paying full attention to the narrator. Like, how can you not fucking love this? There's just so much charm in this city. I don't want to gush about Dragonflight too much, because ultimately there's a lot that is left to be seen, but so far I am totally on board. Look, just a few months ago, I said this in one of my videos. And really, although this isn't a make or break, I would really love to see another one of these secrets in the upcoming expansion. There's already a bunch of incredibly neat things that people are finding out in the overworld, and I mean, if I had to be blunt, it's not a hot take to say that comparing the early days of WoW to nowadays, the community building aspects of the game has only decreased more and more and more over time. Having these short little events from time to time where an entire community of people just gather around to try and solve an issue, or to figure out a solution more so, it's really neat to see. And I mean, hell, back in the earliest days of WoW, there was a ton of myths and urban legends about really deep secrets. Like, remember when everybody was fishing in random fucking pools of water trying to fish up the Ashbringer? Was it fucking stupid? Absolutely. Was it fun to speculate and try random bullshit for the sake of trying random bullshit? Also absolutely. I mean, shit. When the actual Ashbringer itself was an item that was made usable by players, there was a hidden appearance that you found, not so coincidentally, by fucking fishing. Small little things like that add so much to a game like this. And I really think, again, although it isn't a make or break for the entire expansion, I think it'd be really neat to see more of this in the future. And do you know what? This expansion is fucking filled to the brim with those secrets. It's full of just really fun and small things to explore and to find out and to do. I'm not exactly a 99 parser giga gamer, but I think from a casual player's perspective where you prefer to interact with the world and its storylines and collections over endgame instanced content, this is probably the best expansion we've ever had in that regard. I've mostly strayed away from talking about gameplay in this video, except for relevant dungeons, raids, or fucking Dazar'Alor. But this is the first time I think it's relevant, and for once, that's a really good thing. Like while making this video, that whelp daycare I was just gushing about like a white girl has been expanded and now you get to take care of the little whelps every day. I don't want to turn this video into a WoW job tier list, but whelp daycare employee might be the single best career in the entire series, and I really just don't care what arguments you may have against that. Also, I know what I'm about to say is extremely subjective, and ultimately you may think that other cities are more or less beautiful, but for example, let's take a look at Dazar'Alor again. Dazar'Alor is a beautiful city with beautiful shimmering beaches, lush green rainforests, dinosaurs, and all in all, it's pretty neat. However, go outside of Zuldazar and you're met with a hostile desert full of scalies and furries and whatever the actual fuck is going on in Nazmir. On the other hand, Silvermoon is a gorgeous city with stunning architecture and enchanting scenery to lose yourself in. The Ghostlands though? Not so much, and the Plaguelands won't do much to help you either. If you take a look at Valdrakken though, to the north you have the Waking Shores, to the east you have the rest of Darnassus, to the south you have the Azure Span, and to the west you have the Unaran Plains. And if you're noticing the lack of descriptors, it's because I've tried to fill this video with neat little sentences to describe a city's beauty or lack thereof, but a flight through the Waking Shores just has so much going on that coming up with a really brief description of it is kind of hard. And guess what? Unlike other capital cities where it may be difficult to go out and explore, Valdrakken is inhabited by a bunch of fucking dragons. Dragons fly, and Valdrakken is more or less in the center of the continent. If it piques your interest, there's a lot to do and a lot to explore here. To be honest, even if Dragonflight completely loses all momentum and fumbles 10.1 and or 10.3, that doesn't stop this city from being amazing. If there's one thing that WoW has always had going for it, even during the game's most depressing eras, it is their team's god-tier art. Honestly, the only real complaint I have here is that the city may find itself at the center of attention, but even then, from what we've seen, the big bads are just kind of letting the place be. Instead of boasting about how strong they are while we absolutely massacre them in a vehicle segment where we press the one key 18,000 times until they go enough and spout some monologue about how powerless we are minutes before we get a quest to kill them for less gold than a random gray item I fished up in 1,000 needles. It seems like the goons here are more like, oh yeah, the heroes found here are extremely strong. An all-out attack here would be really reckless. Let's go gather our strength elsewhere. Which, did Blizzard have like a single line of thought when they wrote their villains this time? The Jailer is unironically one of the worst villains in all of fiction, So going from this DeviantArt OC looking ass to even somewhat compelling antagonists is really damn good, honestly. Again, it's too early to say, but the adorable little whelp playground isn't in complete ruins because Super Satan prematurely invaded it and unnecessarily lost a bunch of forces. In fact, the villains have been seen in the city a few times throughout the expansion because both parties know that fighting one another there would be incredibly dumb. So I think for the most part, it's a pretty safe and happy pick. Also, I usually preface these types of talks with a category. That's supposed to be political stability. We talked about geography earlier. Now let's talk about the rest of the population. I don't know what the opposite of backhanded compliments is. Front-handed compliments seems wrong, but those are all I can kind of summon in terms of negativity for now. The city may seem a bit foreign if you're not a dragon because it's full of dragons, but dragons are usually pretty cool, and they seem to be more than happy to have the mortal races of Azeroth around. In fact, I actually think they're a little bit too happy. Not in a manipulative or even a toxic positivity sort of way necessarily, but it definitely feels like a lot of their bite has gone away. The best example of what I mean is with the Bronze Dragonflight. Nozdormu and his kin have the power to literally shift reality and potential timelines as we know it, but in a poetic irony, the Titans balanced this with Nozdormu knowing that someday he will be corrupted, driven to madness, and eventually killed. However, it seems like Blizzard seemingly can't have a nuanced conversation about the good found in the bad, the yin found in yang, or how tragedies and hardships can shape us into becoming better people because Chromie is such an overbearingly positive entity that her involvement in any gravely serious story comes off as extremely tone-deaf. Chromie is by far the most extreme example, and thankfully there isn't even a close equivalent to her in any other Dragonflight. But I do think there is a scale between characters that are overbearingly flamboyant and positive, and characters that are just completely unlikable edgelords, and right now I think we're leaning a little bit too far into the former. I remember there being multiple times in WoW where dragons were just complete assholes, and I wouldn't mind seeing a few of them here. Honestly though, this is mostly an unrelated rant about the story since we're still progressing through it, but it's something I do hope is fixed with time. Is there something I missed? I really feel like there is. I'll be honest, it's 6 AM as of recording this. I don't really want to bother to verify. It's pretty good, I guess. Also, to be frank, I'm sure like 30% of this video is going to be outdated in a year or two anyways. WoW content is pretty funny like that, so I don't really know. Anyways, with all that said, that's the video. If you liked it for whatever god-forsaken reason, feel free to like it. Or really any other buttons that you happen to see fit. I'm not going to beg or plead for you for sympathy. If you didn't like the video, dislike it. You're your own person, and I suspect you can come to your own conclusion on whether or not you liked the thing without me pulling up those fucking green screens again. Also, on the topic of buttons, I opened up a YouTube memberships thing. It's 3 buckaroos, and if you want to support the channel directly, it's never expected, but it is immensely appreciated. On a similar note, I wanted to give a massive thank you to my current patrons and YouTube members, including but not limited to Hannah K, Doke Dog, Mitchell M, Anon1, Al Diaz, Wumpus, Zach M, Teachy Boy, Andrew J, Just a Plaid Shirt, Dan, Black Jade, Jacob S, Michael P, Breadman1, Catapultman1, Chair, Judge and Jury, Wobkitten, Skarner Crystalline, Teddy Bear Guy, Cray, Minister of Sauces, Mr. Bones, Frequent, Pyromusical, No Goat, Vegeta, Blazeheart, HKS Ornit, and Cork Attack. Your support means an immense amount to me, and I do genuinely mean that. I was thinking about it the other day, and I think it's kind of fucking wild that, like big streamers out there will get, like, $100 or $200 donations and be like, oh, well, thanks, man. But, like, if you pay me $5, I'm, like, practically indebted to you for life. It's kind of weird how that works. I hope your day is going well, but I especially hope that those I just mentioned in particular are having a better day, because parasocial relationships are really cool. Thank you so much for watching, and as always...
Watch your clever mouth, bitch!